welcome to the second of 3 videos about how to get the most out of learning online. And in this video we're going to be focusing on learning strategies, so how to take notes and how to maybe help the information stick a little bit better. But before we dig into our information, it's really useful to remember that there are as many different ways of learning as there are learners. So some of these exercises might really work for you and others won't. So have a go at them and see which ones are helpful. The first thing you might want to think about as you're going into your course of online learning is, what's my objective? What am I working towards at the end of the course? So you might be undertaking a course that has a traditional exam at the end, in which case you might find that you want to focus on recording and memorising facts, because that's what you're going to be asked to reproduce at the end of the course. However, if you're embarking on learning for your own personal or professional development and there's no examination or assessment at the end, it might be most useful to think about how you can come to an understanding of the material that's going to be helpful for you in your life and work moving forward. Or thirdly, you might have a course a little bit like our courses here at Vocal Health Education, where there is an open book test at the end, or perhaps an essay. And that means that you're going to want to focus on making notes that you can easily refer back to, rather than memorising information. So what do you want to think about when making notes? Well, mostly you want to try and focus on what you think is most relevant. So if you're embarking on a course of learning that has video lectures, it can be really easy to get caught up in writing down beautiful sentences. But it's best to really focus on what the presenter is trying to say and what of that information is most useful for you. Try, where possible, to make connections and contextualise your learning. So you're much more likely to come to a good understanding and be able to remember information if you know what it's for and what it's connected to. So keep asking yourself, what could I use this for? What does it remind me of? How is it connected to what was talked about in a previous video? So you're always looking for connections and context for your learning. When it gets to the end of the lecture or video, it's a really good idea to sit down and write a summary of what's been discussed. Again, this is just a really useful way of weeding out what's the most useful information, and it's also a cheeky way of getting in a bit of revision as well. And finally, use highlighters and clouds and boxes to make connections between connected pieces of material, and again, to just really weed out what's most important. However, there is another way that doesn't involve bullet points and black pens and lined paper, and that is what's known as multi-sensory learning. And multi-sensory learning simply means that the more senses we engage, the more likely we are to retain information. And you might find some of the exercises that we're about to discuss particularly useful if you know or suspect that you're neurodiverse. So if you've been told you might be dyslexic, dyspraxic, have attention deficit disorder, or be on the autism spectrum. And if you want more information about neurodiversity, have a look at our learning resources pages, and there are some really useful hints and links available there. So the first example of multisensory learning is making a mind map. So instead of writing lists and bullet points, you take the information that you're receiving and you put it into the form of a visual diagram. It's a little bit like a tree diagram or a spider diagram, and it's just a way of making the information as visually interesting as possible, making it more likely that we will remember it, understand it, and enjoy perhaps the process of learning it a little bit more. And there's a great study here from 2002 that found it had a 10% improvement for medical students in trying to memorise information. So there's definitely research behind it. So let's have a little look at how you could make your own mind map. Well, you want to start with putting your topic in the middle, and then add an image, and then coming out in branches from that, you want to add other sub-keywords, so important words, and put an image beside each of those. So we're connecting the word to a picture, and we're kind of showing how the words are related by drawing connections between them. If you use different colours for different key words, that's useful. And it's also better to reduce the writing as much as possible. So keywords rather than key phrases is most helpful for your brain in processing that information. The pictures don't need to be good, so don't worry if you've got a load of stick men. It's only for you, it's just to help you retain that information better. And use as much colour as possible. So we want to give our brain as much stimulation in relation to the information as we can, because then it's much more likely to absorb the information itself. And here's a lovely example of a mind map. Another way of thinking about multisensory learning is to think about auditory information, so information that we take in through our ears. This is great because if you're undertaking a video course, whilst you're watching the video, you can simply use your device to make an audio recording at the same time. And then it's possible to listen to that audio recording whilst you're undertaking other activities, so going for a walk or folding the laundry. And it's just a low stress way of doing revision, and it makes it more likely that the information is going to sink in. Hand signals and movements. Maybe not the best approach if you're working in a public space or a library, but engaging your whole body in your learning is shown to be very useful in helping you to retain information. And again, maybe just entertaining yourself a little bit whilst you're learning. So one of the pieces of information that is delivered on one of our vocal health courses in a lovely video by Stephen and Emma is that the word superior refers to things in the top half of the body, and the word inferior refers to things in the bottom half of the body. So you might want to put that learning into your body by stretching up towards the ceiling and saying the word superior 3 times, and then stretching down towards the ground and saying the word inferior 3 times. And hopefully that gives your brain a little bit of extra sensory information in the hopes that you'll remember that key piece of information. As we've already said, drawing, sketching, making is great, particularly useful if what you're learning involves anatomy or 3D objects of some kind. You could even, if you want, get super creative and get your Play-Doh out. I think the thing to remember here is the more playful and the more time you allow yourself to let this stuff sink in, the more likely you are to understand and remember it. And the last one of these is wordplay and stories. So making up stories to go with the information to help it stick a little bit better. So again, another little bit of anatomy information that we learned from Stephen and Emma is that anterior means the front of the body and posterior means the back of the body. So I might imagine, knowing that my nose is the foremost part of my body, that there's a little ant on my nose, anterior. And then I might imagine that, knowing that my bum is the furthest back part of my body, that there's a letter stuck to my bum, posterior or posterior. And that silly little game that I've played with myself has enabled me to remember that piece of information. And finally, we can put all of these together and do a little bit of location learning. And you might need your post-it notes for this one. So the key is that you write keywords on your post-it notes for things that you want to learn or remember, just information you want to be more familiar with. And then you place those notes in different parts or surfaces of the room. So I might put my anterior post-it note in front of me. I might put my green posterior post-it note behind me. And then, in the hopes of remembering that piece of information, I'm going to walk to that location, put my hand on the post-it note, and then repeat the full information that I want to remember. So we've got colours, we've got movements, we've got locations, and we've got key words. So we're bringing all of that together to give our poor little brain the best possible chance of remembering what we've learnt. I hope you found this video useful. Join me for part 3, which is a video about how to get the most out of our courses.